Young Mr. Gregory Fairweather and his wife Elaine both worked for a living, and it was their habit to ride into central London each morning on the same tube train. Leaving their flat after a quick, frugal and figure-preserving breakfast, and both he and she had the kind of willowy figure that is worth preserving, they walked through the grey, windy streets of Camden Town to get on the Northern Line. Then they went together as far as Euston, where Elaine changed to the Victoria Line to get to Green Park and thence to Leicester Square. She worked in the design department of a publisher who did very well out of children's books. Gregory went on to King's Cross because his studio was in a little side street in the St. Pancras area. The citizens who assemble each morning on the platforms of the Northern Line are not, on the whole, a joyous throng. Starting out as they do from Crouch End or Tufnell Park or Kentish Town, and going in, as most of them do, to a day of working in an office to make profits for somebody else, they give the impression of people who are stolidly accepting their fate. At any time from 7:30 onwards, they stand three deep on these platforms, rain-coated and briefcased, some reading newspapers, some staring straight ahead, some smoking, but all silent, immersed in thoughts that do not evidently please them much. Their taciturnity, and the patient stance of their sensibly dressed bodies, conveys the attitude that life, in the form in which they know it, is neither unpleasant enough to rebel against, nor pleasant enough to greet with a smile. They are good, dour, dutiful people, quite different at 7:30 in the morning from their more flamboyant and carefree selves at 7:30 in the evening, when the same platforms often see them dressed up and on their way out for an evening's fun. Among this dutiful crowd, morning by morning, in the fog of November, in the freezing slush of March, in the lyrical mornings of June when it was a worse pain than ever to have to go to work, Gregory and Elaine always stood out as exceptions. Her casual elegance and his quiet but obvious joy in her presence made them worth looking at, and were a perpetual reminder to the most jaundiced onlooker of what lyrical happiness life could hold if you were young and good-looking and healthy and in love. Gregory always bought a newspaper from the kiosk at the entrance to the station, but he never looked at it while Elaine was with him. She was more worth looking at than any newspaper. Even if he had achieved his ambition of staging a one-man show of his work in an important gallery in London or Paris or Amsterdam, and if the newspaper in his hand had contained a long and ecstatic notice of it, he would still not have looked at it as long as there was a possibility of looking at Elaine. They had been married nearly 2 years, and not one bit of the magic had worn off. In fact, it had intensified. So Gregory looked at Elaine, and Elaine looked straight in front of her, turning now and then to meet his eyes with a little mysterious half-smile, as if she were remembering things that it would not be proper to mention out loud with people standing all round. When she did this, Gregory's heart beat faster and his eyes glowed with the intensity of his feeling for her. When the train came in, sometimes they managed to get seats and sometimes they had to stand. If they found seats side by side, Gregory would spend the journey looking at Elaine's earrings. She was not the kind of girl who hangs ornaments from herself at every available point. Her elegance was of the stunningly spare, understated kind. But he had made 2 silver pendants for her ears, and he loved seeing them below the rich brown of her hair. If she happened not to be wearing gloves, he would also look admiringly at the ring on her marriage finger. It was rather a large ring, with a heavy and chunky quality that stood out in contrast to the slim elegance of her hand, and it seemed to Gregory that this was an emblem of his love for her, strong, ardent, male, impulsive, against her feminine restraint and coolness. Gregory was a silversmith whose work was already beginning to be noticed and talked about. Though he was only 26, he had built up good professional contacts, notably with a Bond Street jeweller who sold his work and put commissions in his way, and he had hopes very soon of being permitted to set up his own hallmark. His studio in St. Pancras was a dingy little room, which had for years been the workshop of a dental technician, and the equipment still vaguely suggested false teeth. But to Gregory it was an enchanted place, shining with the rich light of opportunity. He sat for hours there, waiting for silver to heat to the right temperature, dreaming up new designs, and enjoying visions of himself as a modern-day Benvenuto Cellini. And it would all be for Elaine, in her praise and to win her approval. He had courted her with silver. Soon after they met, he had made her a brooch. That summer they had gone on holiday together, and on their return he had made her a bracelet. When they married, he had made her a ring. At the end of their first year, he had given her the ear pendants. For their second anniversary, he had plans for an ankle bracelet. She might need some talking into this. She was not the kind of girl who wore ankle bracelets. But perhaps he could get her to wear it when they lay around for long afternoons, drinking cheap wine and making love. The thought filled Gregory with demonic energy. Every day, when Euston came near and the train slowed and then halted, Elaine stood up in her composed way, gathered her handbag and umbrella, and held herself ready to get out. Gregory stood up too and kissed her. Just on the cheek, because Elaine's lipstick, though of a natural shade that left the onlooker wondering whether she wore lipstick or not, was carefully applied, and she did not want it smudged at the very beginning of the day. But modest as this kiss was, Gregory looked forward to it every morning, and savoured it as the last he would have until the evening blessedly restored her to him. When she got off and the doors closed behind her, he would lean forward in his seat and stare through the window to get a last glimpse of her moving down the platform. And it always annoyed him if some bulky citizen innocently got in the way and deprived him of the final fleeting vision. In short, Gregory was a young husband very much in love with his wife. Marriage, that usually reliable cure for infatuation, had not cured him. On this particular October morning, they took the train as usual. He gave her his parting kiss as usual. He went on to the studio as usual. He had switched on the heating, hung up his raincoat, and was just turning to consider the question of what work he could best do that day, when there was a knock on the door. Surprised, Gregory opened it. No one ever came to see him at the studio. But there was a visitor, asking if he were Gregory Fairweather, and saying that the Bond Street Gallery had supplied his address. Gregory let the visitor in and looked at him with interest. He was a young man, this newcomer, large and smooth, as if he had been specially inflated and plumped out for some Christmas market. His bearing, accent, and physique suggested a man who had been to a public school where, whatever they had done to his mind, they had made his body healthy, and the health had not yet quite worn off. "I want to discuss business with you," he said, handing Gregory a card. "I have a commission to offer you. The money's ready, the work's ready, and all it needs is for you to say that you're ready." He gave a routine winning smile. The card said, Glisters Limited, and gave a London address. Underneath, neatly handwritten, was added, Rodney V. Barker. "This is you?" Gregory asked, indicating the name. "I'm Rod Barker. I haven't been with the firm long enough to get my own cards printed yet. As a matter of fact, it's a very fast-growing outfit, and most of the people who work there are new. Business is building up so fast that we're taking on new staff all the time." Gregory Fairweather turned the card over and looked at the back. There was nothing there, so he looked at the front again. "Glisters?" he said, trying to understand. "I'll tell you what we do," said Rod Barker. "First, may I sit down?" Gregory, embarrassed at his forgetfulness, urged the visitor to be seated. The studio held 2 kitchen chairs, but one was broken. He took the broken one himself. Rod Barker settled his broad frame in the unbroken chair, which creaked protestingly as he leaned back. "Quite simply," he said, evidently going into a well-rehearsed routine, "we make and promote the kind of things that people give each other as presents. There's no better customer than the person who's rushed into the shop to buy a present, usually one they've forgotten till it's almost too late. You know, the husband who's in a panic because he's forgotten his wife's birthday and suddenly remembers it on the way home and leaps off the bus. He has exactly 10 minutes before the shop closes and he daren't go home empty-handed. Or people panic buying just before Christmas. Buyers like that will snap up trash if they have to. Not that we offer them trash. All our ideas are good ones and the stuff is tasteful." "What kind of outlets do you have?" "All sorts. London, the big provinces, the continent. I often go into the gift department of shops, and I don't recall—" "It would take too long to detail all our outlets," said Rod Barker, leaning forward till the chair creaked again. "We're all over and we're growing every day. If you haven't seen our displays, it could be you've been going into the wrong shops. Now, what we want you to do is design and execute some silver rings for us. Good class stuff, tasteful. We'll give prominence to your name because we think it's going to mean something very soon. It's a chance for you and a chance for us. We'll take as many as you can do and you'll get 5% commission." That doesn't sound much. What will they sell for? £250. That way you'll get £12.50 for every ring you put into our hands. And you'll pay for the silver. We'll discuss that. We haven't a great deal of cash liquidity at the moment compared to what we will have soon. Gregory Fairweather walked slowly across to the window, looked out of it at the blank wall opposite, and walked back. Then he said, "What are these rings?" "They're divorce rings," Rod Barker said. "They're what?" "Divorce rings. A man gives a girl a ring when he marries her. What does he give her when they get divorced, as most people seem to do these days?" Gregory Fairweather looked at his visitor with dislike. He wished now that he had not let him in. "I don't get it," he said slowly. "Why should he give her anything? If their marriage hasn't worked and they're about to separate, surely he isn't in a mood to—" "Have you ever been divorced?" Rod Barker interrupted. "No, I haven't, and what's more, I have no intent—" "If you had been divorced," said Rod Barker easily, "or had talked to many people who had, you know that at the actual moment when the decision is taken, people often feel quite tender and generous towards one another. Doesn't seem much like it from the sort of thing you read in the papers. That comes afterwards, when the various agreements about money and property have been drawn up, and the wife's had a year or two to try to get along on what he's agreed to give her, and the husband has had a year or two of trying to run two households on one income. That's when the bitterness starts. That's why lawyers always advise people to smother their generous feelings and go hard for what they can get. At the time when the couple first go to a lawyer, they're usually feeling grateful to one another just because the infighting's over and they've decided to give each other a bit of peace. If she's been nagging him or he's been beating her, it's all over now, and they're going to come to a nice, amicable arrangement and be good friends. And that's the moment when we step in. He's looking round for something to give her. Pretty soon he'll be looking around to see if there's anything he can take away from her. But just now he's in a giving mood and he wants to spend money. So, a divorce ring." Gregory Fairweather was silent. "What do you think of the idea?" Rod Barker asked. "I don't like it." "Why not, if I may ask?" Gregory shrugged. "I just don't." "Well, a lot of people will. It'll make a good gimmick and get talked about. We've got contacts in the press and the media, and we can get it some really good publicity when the time comes. You'll wake up to find yourself famous." "I shan't. I don't want to do it." "Now, this is what we have in mind," Rod Barker said. The chair groaned as he leaned forward. "It won't be a ring in the strict sense, one that goes round in a complete unbroken circle. It'll be more like a clip. It'll go right round the finger, but the two halves won't actually be joined. You've seen rings like that." "Of course." "And on the display side, we want a really tasteful design. That's where you come in. And the words Exere Volo engraved on it." "Exere Volo?" "Yes, that's Latin for I want out." They would have taught him Latin, Gregory realized, at his public school, in between teaching him to play rugby and cricket and keep himself fit and wear the right kind of tie. "I want out, too," he said. "I just don't want any part of it." "I'm surprised to hear that, I must say. It would be a good chance for you." "I don't have to take every chance that comes along." "Perhaps not," said Rod Barker, getting up from his chair. "But you may regret having missed this one." "No, I shan't." For a moment, as Rod Barker looked across at Gregory, a cold hostility showed in his face. Then it relaxed into a smile, and he laid his business card down on the scarred workbench. "I'll leave this anyway. Our telephone number's on it, if you change your mind." "I shan't." "Well, if you do, you know where to get hold of us. We shan't give the commission to anyone else till you've had time to think about it." He started towards the door, then stopped. "There's just one thing I ought to warn you about, though." "Warn me?" "When you turn the idea over in your mind and see what a winner it is, you might be tempted to design and market divorce rings yourself without going through us. Well, don't be. The idea and the slogan are both registered for copyright." "You probably don't realize you're being insulting," said Gregory. He held the door open and stood silently waiting for Rod Barker to take his leave. That ought to have been that. The visitor was dealt with and his repulsive idea consigned to oblivion, and at barely 10 o'clock the day still stretched invitingly ahead. Why, then, did young Mr. Fairweather find himself unable to make any use of the day? He pottered about the studio, he sketched a few design ideas that didn't look right even on paper, and certainly would look hopeless in silver. He messed about for a time with modeling clay. But nothing happened. He walked back and forth, he stared through the window at the blank wall and watched it stare blankly back. Then he sat down in the broken chair, got up, sat down again in the unbroken one, and got up again. This was worse than useless. The day, for some reason, was shot. Stale. Perhaps he was stale. He decided to do something he had never done before, to take a Green Line bus into the country and go for a long, mind-clearing walk. He could get a bus back and be home at the same time as Elaine. The day was rather cold for October, and the sun was shining only hazily, but the thought of the countryside tempted him. He closed the studio and went to the place in Victoria where buses ran into the country. Vaguely he chose a destination that sounded countrified, Epsom or St. Albans or somewhere like that, and was actually sitting in the bus waiting for it to start, when it became overwhelmingly clear to him that he did not, after all, want to go for a country walk. What he wanted was to set eyes on Elaine. He could not have said why with any precision, as he was the first to admit he was not good at saying things with precision, at any rate in words. But he needed her. If only for 5 minutes, he must have the sight and the sound and the touch of her. They had an agreed rule that neither must intrude on the other during working hours, but rules were made to be broken sometimes. If Elaine had been upset about something and had dropped in at his studio for a few minutes, he would have been glad to stop work and comfort her. Gregory Fairweather tore up his bus ticket and dropped the 2 halves into a litter bin. Then he took the tube train to Oxford Circus. It was now 11:30. There was no danger that Elaine would be out to lunch yet. She would have had her morning coffee, gossiped for a while with the other girls in her department, and settled back to work. He went up in the lift and was directed to the design department. Elaine was not there. A girl he knew more or less by sight, a tall, lanky, rather pretty girl called Penny or Fanny or something, told him that Elaine had left at about 11. She had said that because she had some designs she wanted to get on with, she was going to spend the rest of the day working at home. And since she wanted to concentrate hard, she was not to be telephoned. If any messages came for her, she would attend to them the next morning. Gregory was mildly surprised at this, since Elaine never worked at home. She had none of her equipment there, and used to say that the flat would become too cramped if they tried to use it as a workplace as well as a place to live. But perhaps this was an emergency. Perhaps the girls in the office were talking too much, or the boss was interfering, and she needed the quiet of the empty flat. Well, he would not break in on her unannounced. He would telephone first and then go home briefly, and afterwards go out for the rest of the day to give her peace. Downstairs he dialed their home number. No one answered. Elaine must be concentrating hard. Or perhaps some hold-up had occurred and she was not home yet. He took the tube to Camden Town and telephoned from the first box he came to on the way back to the flat. No one answered. He went to the flat and let himself in. No one was there. Gregory Fairweather was quite sure there was some simple explanation. All the same, the next 5 hours were difficult to get through. He went out and came back several times, always hoping to be greeted by Elaine, but never being so greeted. Once, about mid-afternoon, he telephoned the office again, was put through to the design department, and once more got Penny Fanny, who told him with a touch of stiffness that the information she had given him on his visit that morning was still correct and did not require to be updated. It was after 6 when Elaine came home. She sank down on the sofa and kicked her shoes off as if tired, but her eyes were very bright. "Sorry I've been such an age getting home. Didn't get away from the office till 5:20, and then the crowds were awful." "Big day?" he asked carefully. "You can say that again. Fanny was away and I had to answer all her telephone calls as well as go to a design meeting. One of those that drag on and on with nobody putting forward an idea that anyone else can agree with." He handed her a gin and tonic, which was their usual drink together on returning from work. But he put his own down untasted, and when she was not looking, he poured it down the sink. That night, Elaine slept deeply, and in the morning he heard her singing softly in the bathroom. She told him as they walked towards the tube station that there was a design conference she would have to attend in a week or 2. "It'll be a matter of 3 or 4 days. I don't know yet whether it'll be midweek or running across a weekend. Fred Fletcher's very keen we should all go. It's something to do with new techniques." Well, of course, he said. You'll be nowhere if you don't keep up with new techniques. I knew you'd understand, she said, and gave him her little secretive smile. He gave her the usual kiss when the train reached her station. Then he continued to his own and went into the studio. Everything was exactly the same as when he had left it the day before, but somehow it looked different. Gregory Fairweather glanced with distaste at his bars of silver, his furnace, his pliers and engraving tools. On the bench lay Rod Barker's card with the telephone number of Glisters. Gregory picked it up. There was no telephone in the studio. He went downstairs to the coin box in the hall. Exire volo, he said to himself as he heard the number begin to ring. That was rather a lot of letters. How would it be if he engraved them round the inside of the ring and put just a plain design on the outside? Before the telephone had rung 3 times, he was already working on the idea. He was a brilliant young silversmith, and he had great things ahead of him.